Yandere Simulator began development in 2014 as a solo indie project created by a developer known online as Yandere, later identified as Alex, and from the very beginning the project stood out because of its unusual and controversial concept, which centered around a schoolgirl protagonist who is obsessively in love with her senpai and is willing to stalk, sabotage, kidnap, and eliminate rival students in order to remove any romantic competition. And while the idea was presented as a stylized stealth action simulation game set in a Japanese high school environment, it immediately drew attention online due to both its dark themes and its anime-inspired presentation. And shortly after early builds and gameplay footage were shared, the project began gaining traction on YouTube, where creators showcased early mechanics such as stealth movement, basic interactions, and early elimination systems, which caused the game to rapidly spread between roughly 2015 and 2017, becoming a staple of gaming content during that period and generating massive hype, despite the fact that it was still in an extremely unfinished state. And during this early viral phase, the developer regularly posted blog updates, development roadmaps, and experimental features to maintain engagement with the growing audience, which included mechanics such as dragging bodies, disposing of evidence, cleaning crime scenes, stealth takedowns, and various forms of elimination methods. But as time went on, the scope of the project expanded dramatically, while the actual completion of core systems remained slow, and instead of moving toward a stable release build, the game increasingly became a constantly evolving prototype where systems were added, reworked, or delayed repeatedly over many years. And a major point of criticism that emerged over time was that while the game received frequent attention through updates, many of those updates were focused on side content such as Easter eggs, gimmicks, references to other games, fan-requested features, and YouTuber-focused content designed to maintain online interest, rather than completing the foundational gameplay loop or finishing key rival characters, which led to growing frustration among parts of the community who felt that development priorities were misaligned with finishing the game itself, especially as major promised features and characters took years to appear or were repeatedly pushed back. And although the project did receive help from volunteers, including programmers, voice actors, artists, and animators who contributed assets and assistance in good faith, coordination issues, shifting design goals, and the scale of the project meant that even with outside help, progress often remained slow and inconsistent. And this contributed to the perception that the project was stuck in a cycle of constant expansion without convergence toward a final product, while at the same time the developer himself became a central part of the project's public identity, as his communication style, public interactions, and live stream behavior often became topics of discussion, with criticism directed toward perceived hostility toward feedback, inconsistent responses to community concerns, and frequent conflicts with fans or critics online. And alongside development criticism, the project also became surrounded by broader internet controversy over time, including public disputes with collaborators and companies such as external development partnerships that reportedly broke down over disagreements about code structure, workflow, and project direction, with claims and counterclaims circulating online and further fueling debate about professionalism and management of the project. And as the game's popularity remained high throughout the late 2010s and early 2020s, additional allegations and controversies emerged involving the developer's behavior online, including accusations of inappropriate interactions and grooming allegations involving a minor that circulated through online videos, screenshots, and commentary, which significantly intensified public scrutiny and further shifted the narrative around the project from being purely about game development delays to also being about personal conduct and ethical concerns, while at the same time the developer continued to communicate through blog posts, updates, and public statements in which he frequently discussed development struggles, scope management issues, mental health, workload, and the overwhelming volume of emails and feedback he claimed to receive, sometimes stating that large portions of his day were spent responding to messages rather than coding. And as years passed without a completed version of the game and with increasing layers of controversy, criticism, and internet discourse surrounding both the project and its creator, Yandere Simulator gradually transformed in public perception, from an ambitious indie project with viral potential into a long-running and highly debated example of prolonged and chaotic game development, where discussions about the game are often inseparable from discussions about its development history, community drama, and controversies. And by the mid-2020 SCUS, the project remained unfinished, with no definitive release date, limited clarity on its final scope, and an ongoing reputation shaped as much by its decade-long development saga and internet attention cycle as by the actual game itself, leaving it as a case study in how viral success, community expectations, development management, and online controversy can combine to create a project that remains culturally significant even in the absence of a finished product. In addition to what is already outlined, there are several other important aspects of Yandere Simulator's development history and public reception that help complete the full picture of why the project became so widely discussed and controversial over time. One major element is the way the game's core content was structured around a long list of planned rivals, originally intended to be around 10 main story antagonists, each with unique schedules, personalities, and elimination methods. Yet for many years, only a small portion of this system was functional, with Osana Najimi being repeatedly showcased as the first rival in development for an extended period before she was eventually released in a delayed, incomplete form as part of a demo rather than a full game release. This contributed to ongoing frustration because much of the game's identity was built around the idea of a complete stealth sandbox with multiple fully realized story arcs. But players mostly experienced fragmented systems, debug builds, and isolated mechanics rather than a complete loop. Another major factor was the heavy reliance on constantly changing code and frequent rewrites, including large-scale refactoring efforts that were publicly discussed by the developer, where older systems were replaced due to instability or design changes, which often resulted in new bugs, broken mechanics, and long periods where previously working features stopped functioning properly, reinforcing the perception of instability in the project's foundation. Over time, additional gameplay systems were added such as club activities, reputation mechanics, sanity effects, reputation-driven student reactions, and expanded school simulation features. But many of these systems were also reworked multiple times, sometimes being simplified, removed, or postponed depending on performance or design direction. The game also became well known for its large number of Easter eggs, meme characters, and references to internet culture, which, while popular with viewers on YouTube, were often criticized by parts of the community who felt these additions distracted from completing core gameplay and rival progression systems. At various points, external collaboration attempts also played a role in shaping development, including partnerships with outside studios or contributors that later ended or were heavily reduced, often due to disagreements about workflow, code structure, or creative direction, which further slowed consistent production. Another recurring point of discussion was the project's reliance on volunteer contributions through models, animations, and voice acting, which, while extensive, also created coordination challenges as assets sometimes needed to be redone or adjusted to match evolving systems. In terms of community culture, the game developed a large online presence through YouTube content creators who showcased updates, challenges, and myth-busting videos, which helped maintain visibility even during long periods without major progress, but also contributed to cycles of hype followed by disappointment when updates did not match expectations of a near-complete release. The project also faced platform-related issues over time, including concerns about monetization, content restrictions, and visibility on platforms like YouTube and Patreon, which at one point led to changes in how support and funding were handled after policy enforcement actions affected some creator-linked accounts. Later in development, additional content like 1980s Mode was introduced as a prequel-style expansion, designed to show earlier events in the story with a different time period, which again demonstrated ambition but also reinforced concerns that scope was expanding rather than narrowing toward completion of the main game. Throughout all of this, the game's technical base also evolved significantly with engine upgrades and system migrations, particularly within Unity versions, which often introduced compatibility issues and required further debugging, adding to delays combined These factors, expanding scope, repeated rewrites, reliance on volunteer work, strong community attention cycles, controversies,